Good morning, it's Thursday, all day, and welcome to the Vicarage here at Penn, hoping you are well and cheerful today. Folks, looking ahead to this weekend, I really am because our church is open for worship and that's fantastic and it's all going really well. But we have potentially a slight issue here. Two things. Firstly, please, if you have a mask, please can you bring it and please could you wear it? I think it's a good thing for us to do. And so please can we start wearing masks in church? That would be a good thing. The other thing is, last Sunday morning, I'm delighted to say, because numbers are picking up, we came quite close to our maximum capacity for the church under the present social distancing rules. Now, this coming weekend, looking really, really good. It's going to have a great service as always. We do have an overflow in the church hall, so do please come. If you find yourself having to go into the overflow, please do understand. Obviously, we can only take 15 or so in there, but looking forward to that. But I was going to ask, actually, if some of you were coming this weekend, and I do hope you will, because it's great to be in church, we do have a service at 5:30 on Saturday, at which there's a good 20, 30 more spaces there. So if you could come on Saturday, that would be brilliant. That service is 5:30. The church very, very similar, same communion, same hymn, and so on. But if you can come on Saturday, that will be fantastic. You see where I'm going. But please, either way, come this weekend. We're going to worship together, and it's fantastic. So, to our reading today. Our reading today is one which is very, very important to me personally. I don't know if you've ever been through a huge crisis of faith. I have, and I'll tell you about it this morning. I was ordained when I was 26. Believe it or not, I've been wearing one of these collars for over half my life. I've been doing it a long time. I went for selection when I was 21 and was ordained when I was 26. I've been doing this a long time. But shortly after I was ordained priest and when I was 27, I went through a huge crisis of faith, and I'll tell you about it in a minute. But needless to say, this passage is the one that helped me through my crisis of faith. It's the famous passage of the parable of the vineyard. Well, I'll tell you about it in a minute. The context is, as always, Jesus has come into Jerusalem, as I say, for the last time, for the big showdown. He's cried over the city, he's driven out some of the traders from the temple, and the Pharisees and the religious leaders are clearly not liking what's going on. And Jesus at this point says this. And by the way, for the theologically astute of you, if you've got a bit of time on your hands today, compare this passage of the vineyard in Luke 20, compare it with the parable of the vineyard in Isaiah chapter 5. So if you've got a bit of time on your hands today, just read the two passages and compare and contrast and let me know what you think. Another passage also written about a group of people who rejected what God was doing. So Isaiah chapter 5, but this morning I'm reading Luke chapter 20, verses 9 to, I'll read as far as 17. No, I'm going to read as far as, I'll read 17. Jesus began to tell the people this parable. A man planted a vineyard and leased it to tenants and went out to another country for a long time. When the season came, he sent a slave to the tenants in order that it might give him his share of the produce of the vineyard. But the tenants beat him and sent him away empty-handed. Next he sent another slave. That one also they beat and insulted and sent away empty-handed. Then he sent still a third, but this one also they wounded and threw out. Then the owner of the vineyard said, "What shall I do? I will send my beloved son. Perhaps they will respect him." But when the tenants saw him, they discussed it among themselves and said, "This is the heir. Let us kill him, so the inheritance may be ours." So they threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. What then will the owner of the vineyard do to them? He will come and destroy those tenants and give the vineyard to others. When they heard this, they said, "Heaven forbid." But he looked at them and said, "Then what does this text mean? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Everyone who falls on that stone will be broken to pieces, and it will crush anyone on whom it falls." When the scribes and chief priests realized he told this parable against them, they wanted to lay their hands on him at that very hour, but they feared the people. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Like I said, I was a young dark head in those days, bright young priest, and I went through this crisis of faith. And the crisis of faith went like this. I'm not a universalist. I don't believe everyone goes to heaven. I wish I was, but I'm not. Partly because passages like we've had this morning recognise the fact that throughout history, some people have accepted God and some people haven't, and it's just there for all to see. Second, the reason I'm not a universalist is because I believe God has dignified us with free will. We have the choice to accept him or not. And actually, if it's universalism, then in a sense we don't have any choice, because the free will isn't very free, is it? If we're all going to get there in the end anyway, it's not really free will, because there has to be the possibility of rejecting God. So for those two reasons and others, I'm just not universalist. I don't actually believe that everyone goes to heaven. I just don't believe it. And the crisis of faith came because as a young priest, there I was doing funerals in, week out, without having any assurance of where the people were going when I was doing the funeral for. And I found this incredibly difficult. And as I say, it got so bad with me that at one point I nearly resigned the priesthood because of it. And I agonised with this. And I worked it out and agonised and stressed and prayed and all those things. And eventually I managed to come to, shall we say, an accommodation. And there were various things that helped me. And one was this. Firstly, we do not know what goes on in people's hearts and minds towards the end of their life or even during their life. None of us knows what goes on inside the hearts of mankind. And actually, who knows what happens to people? Who knows what they're really stand with God? Who knows what kind of God they're rejecting, whether they do, or whatever, who knows? So we do not know what goes on in hearts and minds. So we just don't know. We can't do that. Second thing, we have to be very, very careful about being judgmental. At the end of the day, I'm glad to say that Jesus is the judge and not us. And there is no room at all for any of us to be judgmental, because let's be honest, from my point of view, if it wasn't for the mercy of God, I'd be in serious doo-doo anyway. So actually, there's no room for anyone to look down on anybody else. And we only are what we are because of God's mercy anyway. So in a sense, that's another reason why, that's another reason kind of helps with this as well, because it does. So firstly, we do not know. And secondly, none of us should ever be judgmental. We should never judge anyone like that way anyway. But the reason this passage helped me was this. You've got a story in here about an owner who owns a vineyard. And he really loves the vineyard. But it's all gone wrong. And so he sends messenger after messenger after messenger. And each time they reject the message. And in the end, because he loves the vineyard so much, he sends his son, because they say surely they'll respect him. But even then they don't. What I want us to see, though, is that God really loved that vineyard. The owner really loved that vineyard, I should say. God really loves the world. And God really loves people. And God really longs that people should be saved. And he gives messenger after messenger after messenger. And in the end, God so loved us that he gave his only son. This is not a God who wants us to reject him. This is a God who wants us to be our friend. And in the end, wherever anybody ends up, you might say, God has done everything God can. And that is what I want to know. In a sense, if someone doesn't make it in the end, then God has done everything. God has tried everything. And it's not through lack of trying on God's part. And I think when I realised about the heart, the compassion, the mercy of God, just the extent to which the vineyard owner goes in this story in order to try and make it work, the extent, the love that God has, that God desperately wants us to respond to him. God, as the Bible says, God longs for everyone to be saved, and that God has done and given everything God possibly could within the remits of free will. And it's with that in mind, it's knowing that we don't judge, we do not know, and that God has loved so much. That is the accommodation I came to that helped me through my crisis of faith. And 28 years on, I'm still here. God bless you, and have